We can go ahead and chant in.
And unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words.
All right, so I am picking up our Jukai class with our study of becoming bodhisattvas, and that is the commentary by Pema Chodron based on Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva. So I wanted to just sort of reiterate that the part of the text that we're in right now is where Shantideva is continuing to talk about the idea of patience as an antidote to anger. So I'm starting where we left off last time. That is chapter 6, verse number 4. And it starts off, I'll read verse 4 and 5 together. Noble chieftains full of hate will be attacked and slain by even those who look to them for honors and possessions. From family and friends estranged and shunned by those attracted by their bounty, men of anger have no joy, forsaken by all happiness and peace. So I couldn't help but read this.
I'm sorry. Do you have that?
He's on a different version.
Yeah, chapter 6, verse 4.
Oh, usually it's a different version. It doesn't look like anything that's in here.
Oh, okay, what do you have?
Number 4 starts, even those dependent on their Lord for gracious gifts of honors and of wealth.
Yeah, that's a different spot. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure where the two texts might have diverged,
Okay.
but yeah. So yeah, this says 6.4. Yeah, so I don't know what to tell you.
We'll just listen then.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I would have to probably pick up that book and take a look and see. I thought that they were going neck to neck.
They were very close.
Yeah, I mean,
a
even
little bit of change at the very slight changing, but I could still read and follow what you were saying. But this was just
this is way different. Yeah.
Different universe.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you mind reading that just one more time? The 6.4.
Sure.
I'm just curious about how they compare.
Even those dependent on their Lord
Uh-huh.
for gracious gifts of honors and of wealth will rise again and slay a master who is filled with wrath.
Okay. Yeah. So those two do make sense together. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very different wording on this particular.
Normally I can see it, but I didn't. Read your translation.
Yeah. So this one, and it's the two together that I think kind of make up the meaning of the one that you just read. Noble chieftains full of hate will be attacked and slain by even those who look to them for honors and possessions. From family and friends estranged and shunned by those attracted by their bounty, men of anger have no joy, forsaken by all happiness and peace.
Wow.
Yeah. And yet, the idea that in looking to these lords, the folks that we see as benefactors, the folks that we see as being that we're dependent on, let's say. And I think in the commentary, Pima is talking about things like toxic bosses or difficult family members or these kinds of folks. That when they're consumed by anger and hatred, they have no joy in their lives, and they often, because of karma, reap destruction. They're often slain. So I could not help but read this first two verses. I'm sorry, the first two lines of this verse. Noble chieftains full of hate will be attacked and slain. In light of the assassination of Charlie Kirk. There are a couple ideas here. One is that we have the laws of karma. So when people are engaging in harmful actions, those harmful actions often come back to them in various ways. Charlie Kirk has been as divisive in his death as he was in his life, and as is pretty predictable in our times, it's pretty much sharply divided the country in terms of seeing someone who is sort of a hateful villain to, on the other side, someone who is a great patriot, and as I was reading this morning. Being lauded for being someone who was promoting civil discourse. I'd like to say civil discord would be a little more closer to the truth. So on the one hand, we have something that we're pretty familiar with, which is the laws of karma. So what we sow is what we reap. And if we're creating hate in the world and creating discord and creating separation between people, those things are going to come back to us. And sometimes that occurs in very dramatic and tragic ways. I often, if I'm on TikTok or Reels, I often watch these videos of people that are doing these ridiculous stunts on motorcycles. And they're always doing them on like public highways and things like that. And these TikToks and Reels are usually about when they fall. And so they're doing this ridiculous trick, and sometimes with cars as well, where people jumping over things and things like that. And in those cases, when they fall and they hurt themselves and they wreck their motorcycle and everything else, the laws of karma are very swift and direct. So when you do stupid things, you reap harmful consequences. So on the one hand, when you have folks who are doing harmful things, they often reap the consequences of their actions. So and of course, in no way am I saying that this particular individual deserved to die. Again, if we're looking at our precepts, the very first one is the not killing. So our way of dealing with difficult individuals is through compassion, through understanding, through easing suffering, either the suffering that they themselves have or the suffering that they create. And certainly it's a non-violent response. So I was led to think about folks like, you guys remember the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, or even Rudolph Giuliani, these folks that, if you're left-leaning like I am, we're pretty hateful folks, or hate-filled folks, I should say. And they just kind of drifted into obscurity. They sort of lost their edge and
I think lost their fortune as well.
Lost their fortune as well. That's right. So eventually, I think people kind of wake up and realize that some of these so-called leaders are not worth following. The big example when it comes to nonviolence for Buddhists is often the question. There's a story of the evil man that's going to sink the boat, the ferry boat. It has like 300 people on it, and if you knew that in advance and you killed the person that was going to sink the boat, would that be justifiable? As we know with our precepts, even something like not killing, they're guidelines, and it's probably the not killing guideline is probably one of the ones that we take the most seriously especially when it comes to killing another human being. But I was led to think about the idea, and the other example is always Adolf Hitler. People always say, well, if you had a chance to kill Adolf Hitler, would you? As a Buddhist. And then, I was just thinking about how there's always someone that steps up to take this person's place. So you kill Adolf Hitler, and then you have Goering take over, or Donald Trump gets assassinated, and then we have J.D. Vance for president. So it's really more the symptom than the cause. We have to remember that the United States elected, in a fair and free election, elected Donald Trump. So at least half of this country believes that this man is our leader. They might not think so much. They might have reconsidered their vote at this point, I hope. But it's important to remember that the symptom is that so many people, at least in my view, were fooled into believing that this man would be a wise and just and helpful ruler. So that's where I think we need to look at what is the suffering that people are feeling, and how can we help to alleviate that. But yeah, I just it just blew my mind, when I read those first lines after this assassination just occurred. I forgot to reiterate at the beginning that obviously if anyone has any thoughts or comments or would like to share your own experience, always feel free to do that. We can always discuss anything that anyone has to bring up. Pima Chodron says, she's commenting on this phrase of noble chieftains full of hate from family and friends estranged. And she says this line could be referring to abusive parents or partners or abusive bosses. They terrify everyone, even their own children, and those who rely on them for food, promotions, and well-being. Shantideva urges us to see that abusive people have no joy or peace of mind. So it's this idea that, again, if we're working on becoming bodhisattvas and easing the suffering in the world, these folks are suffering. Then she goes on to say that, it's easy to get focused on these hurtful leaders, these hurtful people in our lives who are causing harm by being abusive and so forth. But as usual in our Zen practice, it's important for us to look at ourselves. So sometimes it's way easier to point the finger at other people and see what they're doing or not doing, and more difficult to see those same things in ourselves. So she's urging us to see in what ways that we're also dealing with our own anger, or some ways in which we can get caught up in our emotions and cause or create harmful actions. the next verse here, and again, if you guys want to follow along in the Shantideva book, and we can see how different these might be. I have for 6.6, all these ills are brought about by wrath, our sorrow-bearing enemy. But those who seize and crush their anger down will find their joy in this and future lives.
Exactly.
It's exactly the
It's
same.
exactly the same. Wow, look at that. Isn't that something? Wow, okay. So Pima's commentary on that is relating to that line of our sorrow-bearing enemy. So it's looking at, well, what she says is the next time we want to justify our anger, if we think of it as our sorrow-bearing enemy, we might be motivated to refrain from fueling the fire. Of course, we don't really seize and crush our anger. This language just makes it clear that we have to work with it assiduously. She raises the issue of justified anger, and kind of looking at anger as, on the one hand, we talked about anger as, anger is just an emotion. And it's only when we attach to it, it's only when we allow it, when we fuel it, when we feed it, that it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And some of the most dangerous anger is the self-justified anger. So as Pima pointed out, based on a famous person who studied neurobiology, that emotions are very short-lived or lived, depending on your pronunciation. Emotions come up and they dissipate very quickly. Physiologically, for example, but when we fuel them and feed them, they can last longer and longer and longer. We start to tell stories and so forth. So last time, one of the things we talked about was how the Dalai Lama made a great distinction between anger and hatred. So I might be angry at the teachings of Charlie Kirk. I might be angry at the suffering that he might have caused other people during his life, but I don't hate him. I don't hate Donald Trump. I might not be in agreement with the things that they say or do, and I certainly am very concerned about the ripple effect of their actions and the suffering that is being caused. But as far as hatred, I don't have a hatred for them. So that's sort of a different level. So when people start getting into allowing their hatred to take them over, that's when people start using violent speech, and that's when people start turning to violent acts. So, yeah, John.
I just wanted to point out that second line, which is fascinating to me. Our sorrow-bearing enemy. So often, anger and sadness appear together.
Right.
And I think very often the sadness is let go of, in a sense. And what's experienced is the anger, so you don't have to feel the sadness.
Yeah. So anger is, as you were pointing out, is often a cover emotion. And one of the things that I know Pima often suggests to us is that we look beyond our anger to see what's underneath it. And oftentimes it can be sadness, it can be a sense of injustice, something unfair is occurring. It can be abandonment feelings. It can be all kinds of different other emotions that get covered up and expressed by anger.
I mean, this is one of those times when I look at the scripture that was written how many years ago that is built on very basic, solid psychology.
Right.
And so much of Buddhist literature is.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me.
Yeah.
That it was written that long ago.
Right. So, yeah, and it's kind of given rise to a whole field of therapy, which is Buddhist psychology or Buddhist therapy. And I never called it that when I was doing my work, but that's what it was. Yeah, I mean, it was great because I could use all of this to help my patients. So there's a tremendous amount of psychological health that is pointed to by our Buddhist teachings. Yeah, Joe.
So you invoked the Dalai Lama at a certain point, and it reminded me that he has I have an old set of CDs or DVDs that is it was produced by some group based out of the medical school in Wisconsin that the Dalai Lama is very solidly tied in with. And he was coming over here periodically for years, and they were putting a lot of, he would come with his top interpreter from France who subjected himself to MRIs while meditating, and other Buddhist monks and, long-schooled Buddhist scholars of different sorts. And he produced a set of DVDs, and it was simply called Destructive Emotions. And it's all about how emotions play into everything. That without emotions, we are dead. We wouldn't know how to put our shoes on in the morning, literally. And this set of DVDs makes that clear, and a lot of other things, and puts a lot of light onto Buddhist studies and meditation specifically, and how that all plays into us being better equipped to see our emotions playing out while that's happening. So it's great. I'm sure it's available on YouTube or something else today, but it's called Destructive Emotion. The Dalai Lama.
I'd be very interested in that. Yeah. So this is actually as we continue on in this chapter. This is actually a pretty major theme for Shantideva, is talking about how to deal with some of these destructive emotions, especially anger. And it's also a huge theme for Pema Chodron. And the idea is, as you pointed out, that, hey, good morning. Hi, how are you? Good. Have a seat, please join us. So, as Pema Chodron often points out, and you just did as well, Joe, is that we need our emotions. It's part of being human. It's part of, it's an integral part of our experience. So, emotions often associated with the heart, thoughts often associated with mind. Certainly, we can get into, distinctions between healthy emotions and unhealthy emotions. Most of us do that. We like joy, we don't like anger, that type of thing. But Buddhist psychologists and in Zen practice, for example, what we're taught to do in Zazen is to see what it is that's coming up and emerging. So sometimes that'll be thoughts, sometimes that'll be physical sensations, and oftentimes it'll be emotion. And we're taught not to judge those things, but simply to observe them and to let them go, to see the transient nature of our thoughts and emotions and physical sensations. So it's the same with emotions. Emotions are neither good nor bad. They just are. And when we don't attach to them, the text here points out that they really are just energy. Where they start to become destructive, and I would use the word healthy versus unhealthy, or helpful versus harmful, rather than good or bad. But where they start to become unhealthy is when we attach to them, and they can take on tremendous, tremendous force or power in our lives, to the point where, and of course, this is a big part of our Zen practice, we can get better and better at starting to notice that little bit of discomfort, that little bit of, I don't really like how things are going right now. They're not really kind of going the way I want them to go, or this wasn't what I was expecting. So they can start off really small, and then we feed them and they get larger and larger until, for some folks, and I think we've all been there, we're all human beings, so we've all done this, they can actually take us over. We can lose control of our behavior. What we say, for example, how we behave, yelling at people, giving them the finger, throwing things, sometimes hitting people. We can do all of these things because our emotions can become so powerful. So unless we learn to work with and tame our emotions, they can carry us wherever they want. And that brings great suffering to ourselves and to those around us. So that is the direction that Shantideva is taking here, is that when these emotions start becoming unhealthy or destructive or harmful, we have a way of working with them and dealing with them. And so I'm a great proponent, as you've heard before, of, instead of saying to ourselves, well, I'm not going to get angry, we might say to ourselves instead, when I'm starting to get angry, I can practice patience as an antidote. Patience in Shantideva's work, you may remember back to when he was talking about being like a log. So, and it's sort of expressed in this, in our contemporary idea, if you don't have anything good to say, don't say anything at all. So the thing that Shantideva gets to here over and over again is that we need to slow that energy down. We need to take a step back. We need to not be so reactive. So, when we stop, take a few breaths, when we step outside and take a short walk, or look at the sky, or when we listen to some music that has a calming effect, all of these things can slow down our reaction and give us time to think about how we want to respond. So the idea is act, don't react. And this is what Shantideva and Pema Chodron both come back to over and over and over again in this text. All right, well, let's see what else we got here. So verse 6.7, getting what I do not want and all that hinders my desire, there my mind finds fuel for misery. Anger springs from it, oppressing me. Therefore I will utterly destroy the substance of this, my enemy, my foe, whose sole intention is to bring me injury and sorrow. So when he's talking about his foe here, he's talking about the anger. Getting what I do not want and all that hinders my desire. So Pema Chodron raises the question, what triggers our anger? According to Shantideva, it's getting what we don't want and not getting what we desire. When we're heavily invested in our likes and dislikes, tiny reactions can escalate into violence and war. So I was on a retreat once with Dean years ago, and he had made a suggestion to us, and the suggestion was something along the lines of, over the next 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever time period it was, I'm going to suggest to all of you the next 24 hours. to be mindful of what your likes and dislikes are, or what your preferences are. So one of the things that we learn in Zen is not to be attached to our preferences. One of the greatest sources of suffering is that things aren't going how we want them to go. Or Shantideva points out, we're not getting what we want, we are getting what we don't want. So over the next 24 hours, if you practice being mindful of how many times it comes up where we have the opportunity to express a like or a dislike, or some preference or another, and to experiment, besides noticing what our preferences are and what our desires are, besides that, to perhaps let go of making that choice. So, for example, we can do it in a million small ways that could raise our awareness. Where do you want to go for lunch? Well, I have some preferences. I have things I want to eat, things I don't want to eat, restaurants I like, restaurants I don't like. And of course, I'm going to advocate for the food and the restaurants that I want instead of saying, well, I don't know, what do you want to do? And of course, the fear is that I'm going to be, my needs and my desires will not be met. Or anything. There are so many optional kinds of things. We often talk about, this idea of entertainment, and I always come back to the idea that entertainment is completely optional. You don't have to watch something that you don't like. You don't have to, if it's a violent movie, for example, you might not be into that, those kinds of things. But this idea that I don't always have to assert my preferences, that I can be okay, I can go with the flow, so to speak. I can allow other people to make choices. That, I think, has some great value for us. Because the intrinsic idea is, if I don't get my way, I won't be happy. And the truth is that happiness is never dependent on external circumstances. It's always dependent on our internal viewpoint, our attitude. So I suggest that to you as sort of a little exercise that you can practice sort of over the next day or so, to be aware of your preferences, your likes and your dislikes, and to try to hold them more loosely, to try to go with the flow, to allow yourself to be okay, regardless of the circumstances that you might find yourself in, as a result of not trying to, as they say, sometimes push the river. So Shantideva is suggesting that this is where a lot of suffering comes. Our preferences, our likes, our dislikes, and so many of them are just optional. They don't matter much one way or the other. But we tend to place great importance on them. Yeah, Joe.
You mentioned something about war back in the beginning. Could you say that again?
Yeah. So I think what Shantideva was getting at here, or actually, I'm sorry, it was Pema Chodron. She was saying when we're heavily invested in our likes and dislikes, tiny reactions can escalate into violence and war.
So that reminded me of one of the foundational teachings in nonviolent communications, one of Marshall Rosenberg's opening his vision was all fights start with words.
Mm-hmm.
Wars start with words. So that was really moving for me to realize that right in the beginning, when you first go to say something to somebody else, that kind of energy that's in your voice, it's like, why did you do that? Instead of, Chris, how come you did that?
Yeah.
Huge difference. And right there, fights start with words.
Right. Yeah. So very, very powerful. So very powerful. And these words can be fuel for our anger, for our hatred, for our jealousy, for power, for all of these kinds of things. Very powerful. And most politicians, that's what they're doing. They're using words
Yes.
to get
And
their
the energy they put behind it.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm incredulous.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. This I think we've covered pretty well here, but Pema Chodron just brings up the idea of Shempa and then the cliches. Shempa is an uncomfortable feelings that things aren't going our way. She says, full-blown destructive anger starts with subtle Shempa, an uncomfortable feeling that things aren't going our way. It's helpful to recognize this uneasiness before it escalates. If, however, you've already gotten angry, we could still try to find the patience to not act or speak. It's never too late to put an embargo on the fuel of misery. At any point in the process, we can pause and practice patience. And then there's this idea that one of her teachers expressed to her, which is anger is not me. So we tend to identify very strongly with our emotions rather than to see them as, of course, they're always a part of us, but rather than to see them as something that's like a driving force. And one of her teachers described it as they were visualizing their anger as an insect that lands on them, and you can brush it off. So she says here, anger is not me, it's just dynamic energy. If we don't identify it, that energy remains unfixated and free. If it freezes into want and don't want, however, we can accurately predict the outcome, which is suffering for all of us. In verse 6.9, Shantideva says, so come what may, I'll never harm my cheerful happiness of mind. Depression never brings me what I want. My virtue will be warped and marred by it. Pima's commentary on that, she puts it pretty well, so I'll read what she has to say. In his typically enthusiastic style, Shantideva rouses himself. So come what may, I'll never harm my cheerful happiness of mind. This joy is a feeling of workability. Our life and mind are workable. Shantideva's intention is to help us realize this. So how often have we said to ourselves, hey, this is just who I am, you know? In my case, I'm 71 years old. I've been doing this shit for, all these years. I'm not going to change now. You can't teach an old dog new tricks, all these things, But what we know from developmental theory, for example, is that we continue to change throughout our entire lifespan. And as much as we like to think that aging brings sort of a fixedness and sort of a lack of elasticity, that's actually not true. So what is true is that our own attitudes towards learning and change make a huge difference. So you hear about people who are, enthusiastic and open to new experiences and go back to school and start, third or fourth careers and volunteer and do all of these things and continue to grow and change throughout their lives. And that's not the common conception that we have. So for all of us at whatever stage of life we're at, the idea is that we don't have to be attached to our fixed views. Now, that's not to say that if we're self-aware, and certainly what does Zen suggest to us that we know the self. We can't let go of the self until we know the self, and study the self. So that includes understanding how we have become who we are today. And a lot of that is based on our past experience. We've been molded and changed and so forth by all kinds of different things. But at the same time, what Shantideva is suggesting is that we can change. And we can work with our mind, we can work with our emotions, we can change our behaviors. So there's a great plasticity to our brain. We can create new neural pathways. We can create new views and new ways of being. There's in one of the self-help programs, there was a saying. It was act your way into right thinking. Try new behaviors, try different things, see how they affect you. We watched a documentary on Anthony Bourdain last night, and his whole thing was throw yourself into unexpected situations. And it's one of the ways that you can change and grow and see the world in a different way. And yet, how many times do we just rely on habit energy and fixed views? So that's what we're kind of fighting, or I should say, not even fighting, but just working with in our Zen practice. It's being open, flexible, and we can change our minds. There's a national or international meditation day, and it's called Change Your Mind Day, and that's kind of what's being referred to here. You weren't here for the first part of this, but I always invite people, if you have any comments or questions or anything you'd like to share, feel free to just jump in. Yeah. Pema Chodron goes on in her commentary to say, his cheerfulness comes in part from knowing that it never helps to indulge in depression and discontent. The instruction is to interrupt discouragement's momentum, interrupt the storyline, and return to the immediacy of your experience, no matter how unpleasant. So that contains a number of important thoughts. One of them is in our Zen practice, what we're looking at doing is observing and experiencing the present moment. And ordinarily, when we're doing that, and I used to do this as an exercise with my patients, and my patients had tremendous, overwhelming life problems. Depression, all forms of mental illness, addiction, all of these things that were really debilitating. And so we would do this thing in group where, I would have them do a little deep breathing and, some light meditation and so forth. And then sort of ask the question like, how did that feel? How are you feeling right now? Are you okay right now in this moment? And invariably they would say, yeah, right now I'm okay. We had chairs to sit on. We were either air conditioned or heated, depending on the circumstances. Nobody in the room was particularly starving at that point. And although there may have been some upsetness in that present moment, when we connect with the present moment, generally there's a sense of well-being. It's not universally always the case, and Zen teaches us to observe whatever it is that comes up. So Pema is also saying that besides that we can interrupt the momentum of discouragement, she's also saying that if you find pain there, you can be okay with that. You can be okay with that. You can observe it and not attach to it. And this is a huge lesson for many people. Yeah, Joe.
I'm curious, after seeing all those people, the people with the different ailments that you just described, at the end of a particularly busy day, how were you able to manage your own emotions?
Well, I think, to be honest with you, towards the end it became quite much more difficult than it had been. And there were always a few times when something out of the ordinary would happen that would hit me a little harder. For example, a suicide or overdose, especially if it was someone that I related to or liked. And sometimes, I would get somewhat overwhelmed by just the sheer difficulty of some of the circumstances that people were facing in their lives. It's just like, oh man, like I can't believe that happened to you. And it's usually not just one thing; it was one thing after another. So towards the end of my career, it did become a little more difficult. It was one of the reasons I decided to retire when I did. But ordinarily, I can answer that by saying, and this may not be such a good thing, but I have it can get in my way sometimes, and sometimes it can be helpful, but I have a defense mechanism, which is called compartmentalization. And I was pretty good at that. At the end of the day, I could usually set aside whatever happened and kind of go with my life. And people used to say, gee, that must be a very difficult line of work. And what they were focusing on were the relapses, the hospitalizations, the tragic circumstances that many people had in their lives. And I always just focused on the idea that people have the ability to change and get well. And so I was always, and oftentimes, because I was working a lot with addiction, oftentimes people's lives would pretty dramatically improve once they stopped using. So within, say, a 3-month period of time or a 6-month period of time, I could see improvement in people that other disciplines might not see. So someone who was dealing with a chronic illness, for example, you might not see that much change or improvement in a person's condition, versus oftentimes there was pretty swift and dramatic improvement in patients that had drug addiction or mental health issues that they learned to cope with. So I think my primary answer is compartmentalization. I was pretty good at that. And it came naturally. All right. We still have just a few more minutes, and then I think we'll stop. So it's a few minutes before 11. I think we'll stop at 11 if that's good for everybody. Okay. Let's see. Verse 6.10. If there is a remedy when trouble strikes, what reason is there for despondency? And if there is no help for it, what use is there in being sad? Shantideva instructs us to stand back from the heat of our anger and not get entangled. If we're caught in a traffic jam, for example, what's the point of fuming? If there's a remedy, like an off-ramp, there's no need to be upset. But if there are cars as far as the eye can see and no way out, then obsessing only makes us unhappier. If you can do something about your situation, then do it. And if there's nothing to do, it's ridiculous to get all worked up. This is Shantideva's advice for stress reduction. So seems pretty straightforward. I think, again, in self-help groups, there's this thing called the serenity prayer. God, what is it? What's it called? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So that is not very different from what Shantideva says, only in our case, there's no deity involved. We're just doing it ourselves. But we're discerning things we can change and things we just need to accept. Yeah, John.
Almost dropped my pen. As somebody that deals with some OCD, something that's been very helpful for me is saying that I don't really have control.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realize this is kind of a proxy for control, or certainty is another way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
And by giving up that, say, desire for control, and I think the desire is still there, but acknowledging that it's unachievable has been very helpful. So
Nice, great. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate that, and it certainly relates to what we're talking about here. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, John.
just on what John's saying is, it strikes me not only as we're talking about anger, but as we're talking about all of this, that when we feel caught by something, the first thing to look at is probably the self.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How is this anger affecting the self?
Yeah.
Which doesn't exist.
Right. Ego.
Yeah. You know, the things that you're talking about. We don't have control. That's the biggest. There's so little that we have control over in life, and we think we have control over so much.
Yeah.
So this is a good example. The OCD stuff just comes. It's just the stream.
Mm-hmm.
The same way as emotions. I used to tell the story to try and help some of my patients understand emotions. You're standing in line. The person in front of you steps back and stomps on your foot. Your immediate reaction is anger. Two things can happen. Well, more than two. But if that person suddenly turns around and says, "Oh God, I'm sorry. I didn't know I just didn't know you were back there," whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The anger melts away. If 2 seconds later they step back and stomp on your foot again, guess what's back? So it's our emotions are very much reactive, or out of the blue. They can come out of the blue too.
Right. Yeah.
And that just reminded me of a long time ago. I realized you can be with somebody, a significant other, for instance. I'm sure we've all been in this situation where you're really maybe driving to a house where you're going to go in with some guests, and you might be having a rather heated discussion in the car, and you're really pissed off when you get out of the car and you go in and you smile, "Hey, everybody." And it's just proof, it's solid proof that you can really control your anger.
Mm-hmm.
Because suddenly you're okay and you're happy and you're Mr. Joyful or Miss Happiness, and you mingle with everybody. And what happened to all that stuff just a moment before?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have to stop and think about whether they actually can control their anger or not, or see that they actually can in many circumstances.
Yeah.
Because they do it whether they recognize it or not.
Right. So the folks that generally say I can't control my anger have, the short fuse is a common expression. And, a couple of weeks ago, Dean was talking about, to a person that only has a hammer, everything looks like a nail, I think. And so a lot of folks, who are in the habit of feeding their anger, go through life with a chip on their shoulder, looking for situations to be angry about. That's their mindset. Our mindset, I think, although all of us struggle with anger from time to time, is, we want to ease suffering in the world. We want to be more understanding. We want to be more compassionate. And to Shantideva's point, we can tame our minds. We can work with our minds. We can change our minds. I think you're exactly right that folks who feel that they can't control their anger probably have not been working on it. They haven't been trying to change that. And oftentimes it's not something that a person can change on their own. It's something that requires therapy, especially if their anger is rooted in trauma, for example. Working through that trauma and learning to find new coping skills is very important. So folks that struggle with anger and rage often have that anger and rage for very good reasons, but still need to learn to moderate it or manage it. And it is certainly possible. It can be someone's life work to learn how to do that.
Another teaching from MVC is every action is an attempt to fulfill some unmet need.
Yeah, yeah. I love that idea. I
Yeah.
love that
So what
idea.
is the need behind all of this?
Yeah, that is so helpful for us to
Yeah.
think in those terms, if you I tend to vilify Mr. Trump, because like I said, left leaning. But what is his unmet need? Or what is his character disorder, or what are his mental health issues? What is his suffering that has caused him to be who he is and to create so much additional suffering in others? Kimberly, and then we'll go to John.
Okay. So just a couple verses back that you read on Pima's commentary, she talked about, if you can find it, well, I'll just put it up. So anger and these strong afflictive emotions start in the subtle body and the somatic system. And recently I'm involved in a month-long course on somatic and subtle body, but I've been practicing it for over 10 years. And in our culture, we go and we go to the gym and we work out, but there's a whole lot of information out there and specific training on how to train your mind and your body. Because you think mind, well, where is your mind? It's not here. Where is it? So it's important to really ground in meditation. I mean, there's so many different approaches to it, right? But just to ground and to tune in to the subtle energy and the subtle aches and pains and investigate it. And so then the point of that is, how do we live our lives when we're out in the world? To notice those subtleties before they even turn into thought. Because thought becomes before words, because that's our practice, to be mindful of our body or our speech, our mind. So it's all interconnected and woven in these teachings. And a lot of times just our sheer presence is enough in some, any kind of ugly situation you may find yourself in, because you can't control. I mean, you can kind of have a plan when you wake up in the morning, but when you reflect on your day, it's interesting how things come up and it doesn't really turn out, as you had thought it would. So with that, I'll bow out.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment, Kimberly. And I very much agree. I think a lot of times either ourselves or the folks that we see in the world, I like to think of, walking zombies. We're kind of walking around unaware of what's happening. We're sort of sleepwalking through life. And you come to a Zen practice or other forms of training, and you find out, oh, I can develop this self-awareness. I can know a lot more about what's going on. And I think the longer that we practice that, the more subtle our awareness becomes. And so people often describe this idea that that we can be aware of emotions before they're even emotions. So it gets more and more subtle, our awareness. And as with most things, the more we practice, the better we get at it. But just having that open-mindedness that, hey, I want to know what's going on. Some of these emotions can be so destructive that I want to be able to catch them earlier and earlier before they take me over.
Yeah, and I can even recall in the past couple of weeks, there have been times where it's like, woo, totally caught.
Yeah.
Totally took the bait,
Yeah.
It just happens.
Yeah.
And it's all according to, my personal causes and conditions.
Yeah.
there it is again.
Yeah.
Oh, hello, my friend. Just wow.
Yeah, we can be triggered by so many things, and we often say, there's a huge part of our mind that is subconscious, and so what we're trying to do is make the subconscious more conscious, raise our consciousness. So,
Two things. Just one of the things you talked about, looking at night about how different the day goes. One of my favorite sayings lately has been, "Life is what happens while you're making other plans." The second thing, and the first that I was going to say is, you talked about Donald Trump and how do you find compassion?
Yeah.
Obviously, I struggle with that and with Charlie Kirk, but the one thing, in all honesty, that I have been able to do with both of them, they are so apparently angry, evil, all of that. What kind of intimacy can either of those men have had? Real intimacy with another human being? I don't think they can have any. Certainly, I don't know enough about Charlie Kirk, but watching Donald Trump for the last how many years, I don't think he can have an intimate relationship with anyone because the whole world's about him. What kind of limits does that put on your life?
Yeah.
What does that do to you? Doesn't mean I don't struggle with hating the son of a bitch periodically, but it's that. If there's one thing that allows me to have a bit of compassion for that, it's what's your life like when that's what's bubbling up inside of you all the time? That's the one inroad that I've been able to make in terms of finding some humanity and some compassion. So I thought I'd throw that.
Yeah, it's a very helpful way of looking at him, I think. Yeah, I don't know too much about his early background, but I know he had a very difficult relationship with his father. So whatever nurturing was lacking or whatever.
Well, his father, if anything, from everything I've read, was even worse than he is.
Wow.
Now, obviously, I'm just reading about it, so I don't know that that's true, but it certainly appears to be true.
Wow. Well, so I think we'll wrap it up at this point. And I just wanted to say, first off, thank you for being here this morning. And most importantly, thank you for your input and your comments and your participation, sharing your thoughts. And it's very, very helpful for sure. So I just think we get a tremendous amount from sharing our thoughts and feelings with each other. So the other thing I just wanted to mention briefly is that, I think when I first picked up this text, actually at Dean's suggestion, I was like, oh man, like Shantideva, you got to be kidding me! Like this is centuries old stuff, And isn't there something more contemporary we could study? Even Shahaku Okamura, or anybody that's still alive, or that's So I'm as the more I've worked with this, the more I've become aware, as we talked about earlier, related to Buddhist psychology, that a lot of these ideas, this guy was writing centuries ago, and it is very relevant to our current circumstances and our current practice. So I'm kind of blown away by that. The power of Dharma is that it does have kind of a timeless quality to it. Ways of working with our minds are not entirely new. So that's I'm kind of impressed by that as well. So anyways, thank you for being here this morning, and we'll go ahead and chant out.
And thank you for your teaching.
May our attention equally penetrate every being and place with the true merit of Buddha's way. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates around us. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. So be mindful of your likes and dislikes and preferences and see what you come up with.
Do we put the chairs back to that?
I think
Yeah, the chairs go back in the back room now, and we need to pick the books up.
What is your name?
There.